Think forward. Think Research Channel.
During open surgery, of course, the doctor can see and feel everything that he needs to get access to be able to do the procedure. With minimal invasion, that direct touch and feel and the ability to do that is removed, and the doctor has to do the complete procedure with just a camera. And that makes it a lot more difficult.
We can't do anything without an image. The image that we use is only going to become more and more important. And how we see not just surface anatomy, but beyond that anatomy is going to become more and more important. And so we're going to be able to get to more places less invasively when we can see things and image things better and create real-time images better.
REVEAL stands for Reconstruction, Enhancement, Visualization, and Ergonomic Assessment for Laparoscopy. The funding for this project comes from the U.S. Army. They have a unit that is interested in telemedicine and advanced techniques for things that are going to happen on the battlefield. So the Army is really interested in medical techniques that can help people who are really not that well trained as surgeons nevertheless do really advanced techniques.
TATRIC is the Telemedicine and Advanced Technology Research Center. So we have the privilege, if you will, of being the tech watcher, the looker around for exciting and interesting breakthrough technology that may impact healthcare, whether it's in the military arena or in a civilian arena. We are interested in the operating room and its environment because so much of our concern relates to trauma care, to injury on the battlefield, or injury back home.
It's all geared for patient safety, and the patient is our main goal. And anything that we can do with technology that will help keep our patients safer, help out the doctors, the nurses, all the staff in the OR, and improve the efficiency in the workflow, that's great. That's the whole goal.
And that pervades almost everything that we do, even those things that are more technical in nature. If there's not a patient safety hook to it, it really isn't quite what we're seeking.
When you think about advances in science, often they really relate to new ways of seeing something. And you go back to Anton von Leeuwenhoek, you've got the little microscope and how to see something that could not be seen previously, or telescopes in astronomy. And really the Viz Center is pushing the frontiers of what you can see in the sense of how you see it, how you analyze what is present. And you've got the REVEAL project, and you're presenting a new way of seeing for surgeons, a way of integrating pre-surgical imagery with the surgical imagery from the minimally invasive work, et cetera. That's an amazing extension of what the surgeon's capabilities are.
This project's been strongly supported by the University of Kentucky, and it really shows their commitment to advances in surgical innovation and technology, but also in computer science, in technology and how it can be applied in a way that's interdisciplinary. The project has space in the Center for Visualization and Virtual Environments.
The Center for Visualization and Virtual Environments, I think, does a number of good things. We have projects that involve immersive displays that can be used in medical arenas or manufacturing arenas, or they could also be used in the classroom. So I'm very proud that the research that we're doing here has dual purpose.
We have outstanding people there working with other outstanding people, whether we're talking about in medicine, engineering, et cetera. The Center for Visualization is one of these really important centers.
The space that we have is crucial to being able to accomplish our technical goals. We really need some floor space to be able to work with display configurations and large clusters of computers that are required to drive the kind of software that has to be developed.
It's really exciting to see groups of scientists or engineers get together and say, this is where we need to go. This is a direction that needs to happen, and to sort of take the bit and run with it and make a center where they can have an exciting interaction. And I think that's what's neat about the Viz Center, is the interactions that are occurring there, where you see sort of a confluence of technology and intellect that really can drive the discipline.
Reveal is divided into pieces with different experts leading in their areas of expertise. Display, image capture, and ergonomics are all areas that will reduce the amount of training and stress for the surgeon. Minimally invasive or laparoscopic surgery is ideal for the patient, so by improving training, we can increase the number of surgeons that can safely perform the procedure. Better training is also going to reduce the chance of complications.
The current state of the art is to take the video signal directly from the endoscope to the display, which is basically a TV screen, much like you might have at home, only smaller.
Okay, so any kind of surgical procedure that's done with a scope has to be performed by the team from just the images that come from the scope. And that's really difficult because there's a level of indirection. There is a necessity to do everything that has to be done surgically by looking just at the image that comes from the scope. And the removal from the scope makes it hard to do what you need to do safely and effectively.
When you're used to open surgery, which is how we all start training in conventional open surgery, you have, again, as I said, you have direct visual contact with the operative field, you have depth cues, you have stereo vision, you can move your head, and you can use shadowing and parallax and stuff to kind of give you more visual cues. I mean, if I move my head around a screen, that doesn't do a whole lot of good for me. So so again, having lost direct visual connectedness with the field, we lost a whole bunch of information and a whole bunch of cues that were both tangible and intangible. I.e., by that I mean things that we could describe and things that were just gut feelings that were wrong, working off an image.
Working from an image to perform tasks that we normally carry out with all of the senses and mobility that our bodies allow can drastically reduce performance on even simple tasks. When backing an automobile, we turn our head and shift from side to side almost continuously to alter our view of the scene behind the car. Seeing the same scene from a range of different viewpoints allows us to quickly steer a safe path between obstacles. Vehicles like buses or luxury cars with a rear-mounted backup camera provide drivers with a visual challenge much like that created by minimally invasive surgery. The driver has a complete view of objects immediately behind the vehicle, but has to interpret this view by looking at a monitor in the car. The image on the monitor is a challenge to interpret because it appears disconnected in space from the actual scene. Since the aim of the camera is determined by a fixed location on the vehicle, simple adjustments to the visual field that you normally make by moving your eyes have to be carried out by steering several thousand pounds of vehicle.
Oh no, crushed that one too.
So this project is looking at ways to keep the scope there because it's important to have minimal invasion, but to make what you see from the scope a much more rich environment, a much more simple environment in which to operate.
It was evident to me, I've been doing laparoscopy, minimally invasive surgery, pretty much from the outset. So I've been involved in pioneering some of the techniques that we now use, and we needed to be able to have images that were just much more useful and responsive to our needs.
Adrian Park is a surgeon, and so he knows intimately how the environment that he requires needs to be set up so that he can accomplish safe surgical procedures.
And then fairly early on, I met with Dr. Seals, and I was just, we just really hit it off because I realized that he had a real passion about computer visualization, and I didn't even know this field existed, and it was very evident very early on that this is a wonderful union.
Well, as a computer scientist, I understand the technology that we'd like to employ for surgery. So my role on the technology side is to develop the software and the hardware that we can use. So what we're hoping to do is to build new technologies using computers to improve the safety and the effectiveness of doing surgery with scopes.
So the idea is to help the surgeon by allowing them to see information that was gathered preoperatively in scans, or to see through structures that may be obstructing their view. We've put together a federated projector system where a number of projectors are brought to bear to produce a single image, both to give us superior image quality because we get a lot of pixels and a lot of brightness on the screen, and also because it allows us to use relatively low-cost standard components in the system. We don't have to go out and get one giant high-intensity, high-density projector. We can make it out of off-the-shelf components. To create a single seamless image out of these individual projected images, we have to add a camera to the system to observe what's actually appearing on the screen, and then use the information that we get from the observed image and the display of known patterns, made up of dots in this case, to figure out exactly where each projector is positioned, how it's rotated, and what its brightness is. At the end of the calibration process, we display a rectangular grid that shows you the end result of the calibration. And if you compare what you would have gotten at the beginning before the calibrated display was formed, you'd see every projector had its own piece of the image that it put out without respect to the other images. And after calibration, you see it's one unified mesh displayed across the whole screen. And then we use some image processing techniques to establish a single frame that'll fit inside the sum of all those smaller images. And as the video or the still image is projected, we use that transformation to use each of the individual projectors to project its respective piece of the overall image. So in addition to the normal image display that you get from an off-the-shelf projector, we've also built into the system the capability to project stereo images. We put a polarizing filter on the projectors themselves. A set is polarized for the left images and a set is polarized for the right images. And we use those projectors to project onto a single screen. And then the observer wears polarized glasses that can sort out the left image and the right image based on the polarized light that created it. So once the respective images reach your left and right eyes, your brain is able to reconstruct a stereo scene. The calibration process that uses the camera to observe the projected scene and then correct it so that it makes a single unified homogeneous image can also be used to correct image distortion that occurs when you project onto surfaces that aren't just a traditional projection screen. And so if you want to project onto a curved surface, be that a wraparound screen that you've made, or even a curved surface that already exists in the environment that you want to use, reuse for this purpose, the calibration technique will take into account what it observes and make the necessary corrections to give you a correct image when you observe it from the user's perspective. The current endoscopes have a single optical path through the scope, and so what you see is a flat two-dimensional image on the screen, just like you normally see on the television. We're working with a new technology that is an endoscope with two optical paths through the scope that will allow us to essentially put the surgeon's two eyes into the operating scene and make it possible for them to reconstruct the scene in their head the way we normally see things with our two independent eyes that give us the ability to perceive depth.
Intra-abdominally, there are many situations where it would be a great help to be able to measure a specimen, again, some target anatomy that you're working with, a defect if you're trying to repair a hernia.
One of the image processing tasks that we've been looking at is to reconstruct a three-dimensional scene. With the reconstructed three-dimensional scene, we can identify points in the scene and produce, based on image processing techniques, the actual linear measurement between those points.
It'd be very helpful to be able to have some kind of accurate measurement of any of those items. And to this point, it's almost laughable how rudimentary are the techniques that we now use to measure, the length of a spleen or a segment of bowel or a defect. We will, we'll do things as crude as trying to cut a paper ruler in half so we can put it down a port and stretch out a ruler to be able to measure what we want with the kind of accuracy we've never dreamed of in a really kind of user-friendly way. Boy, that'd be a really big deal.
Over the next year or two, we're looking forward to deploying a lot of these things in the simulation center at the University of Maryland Medical Center and seeing them actually applied.
The Simulation Center is part of the University of Maryland medical system in Baltimore, Maryland, and it's located in the UMMS main hospital, 7th floor, south wing. It consists of 4 primary ORs and all the ancillary rooms that surround it, as they were used 1.5 to 2 years ago for surgeries. Actually, in these rooms you would have seen actual patients being worked on. Reveal is actually one of a number of projects that are here. It's one of 2 TATRIC projects actually that are here, and as such it's one of the earliest projects, and it's the largest deployment on inception of the Simulation Center in the area.
Okay, now we're going to start with the left-sided hernia, so I want you to show me the hernia. Advanced laparoscopic surgery is difficult and is more difficult than most types of open surgery, and as a result is often can be very tiring and very burdensome for the surgeon, both in terms of how you have to concentrate visually on the image and also how you have to kind of contort yourself to hold instruments and get them through the ports and to get the appropriate leverage and do the appropriate movements. So we talk about the ergonomic risk factors that are violated with laparoscopic surgery, and they are quite considerable compared to open surgery.
We've discovered that ergonomics really should be divided into 2 areas: physical and cognitive, or mental ergonomics. Dr. Lee is currently running tests to see how to help the surgeon physically.
Because of the nature of a surgical procedure and the environment, including the monitor, table, and the long shaft instrument, surgeons practicing laparoscopic surgery had some physical problems such as a wrist problem, fingers, neck, and other complications.
And most images, I mean, the images that we now use are not in the best places ergonomically to be looking at them for extended periods of time. We've got our necks extended and we're looking away, and so the issue of fatigue, the ergonomic risk factor violations that we encounter daily, these are real issues.
A motion tracking system allows us to record body movements during laparoscopic surgery. The goal is to quantitatively evaluate the exaggerated movements required to operate laparoscopic instruments, and then recommend changes to instruments and procedures that will make the operation safer, both for patients and surgeons. To track a surgeon's movements, we mark key points on their body with beacons that are detected by special cameras. The cameras feed the detected beacon location to a computer that's able to reconstruct the surgeon's movements so that they can be analyzed. The exaggerated motions that a surgeon must use to operate through the long laparoscopic surgical instruments are similar to the kinds of adjustments that a person must make to maintain control and balance when walking on stilts. On stilts, a person's natural gait and posture are disrupted by the exaggeration of the length of the legs. The muscular system has to work extraordinarily hard to maintain balance and control with these unnatural extensions in place. It really is the same with laparoscopic instruments, where natural motions for the coarse movement of the hands and fine controlling movements of the fingers are disrupted by the lengthening of the forearm and the amplification, or we call it the damping, of the wrist and finger motions. Just as the stilt walker risks injury from awkward shifts of the upper body while controlling their balance, the laparoscopic surgeon risks injury from unnatural movements of the upper body and the wrists and the fingers while manipulating the instruments.
We would like to identify the risk factors and try to reduce the risk factors associated to the laparoscopic surgery, so surgeons can practice this wonderful surgical procedure for a long time without experiencing any physical complications. I will measure the joint angles, joint forces, so I can reconstruct the human movement into interventional space, so we can integrate the information as a part of ergonomic analysis. We just have this motion capture system, which consists of 12 high-speed 4-megapixel high-resolution digital cameras. As you can see here, there are LED arrays around this lens which transmit infrared light to the space. When the light is reflected back to the lens, the computer chip inside of this camera identifies the center of this marker and then identify the location of this marker in three-dimensional space. With a predetermined preset marker attaching to these markers on surgeons, we can identify the location of joint angles and the arm segment, and then the computer program calculate joint angles, velocity, segment accelerations, and the force information from the force plate, and then we can identify the force information acting on the joint movement. We have two force plates where the surgeons will be standing on it. Then we can measure the ground reaction forces and moment vectors. According to that information, we can integrate that information to the kinematic joint angle information obtained from the motion capture system. We can understand how the force is acting on each joint segment.
Okay, so here's the inferior epigastrics and medial umbilical ligament. So again,
Training and application in the operating room are all really important, and there's a cognitive aspect that really hasn't been explored before. So Dr. Carswell is helping us add that element to our study. She's a psychologist who's making sure that we develop new technology that doesn't overload the surgeon's mental capacity.
One of the really important things about the REVEAL project is that it's attempting to develop technology that really serves the user. In other words, we want the technology to be user-centered. And for it really to be user-centered, one has to understand the psychology of the user, and that psychology includes the amount of cognitive effort, for example, that the user, the surgeon in this case, would expend, their preferences, their expectations, issues regarding stress, because certainly the surgical theater can be a very, very stressful place where the stakes are high. These issues certainly aren't particular to surgery. I think most of us can think back to the whole issue of mental workload when we were learning to drive or learning to play a new sport. When you first start to learn, say, to play basketball, you may put all of your mental effort into just dribbling the ball. So you're really, really focused on dribbling that ball, and you may do that over and over and over, dribble it around the court and around the court. And one of the reasons that you would do this, or a coach might want you to do this, is so that that skill can become very automated. That means that you can start doing a lot of other things at the same time, and that becomes pretty important when you have to keep track of a bunch of teammates. They're moving quickly around the court, where you're having to plan your next move, where you're trying to be crafty on top of all this. Maybe you've practiced with your teammates, you played around, you've had a lot of fun, then all of a sudden you're at the big game. Now you're dribbling down the court and 10,000 people are looking at you, and you're thinking about making a fool of yourself or maybe even suffering bodily harm. And all of a sudden, if you don't have reduced workload on the simple tasks, you can find yourself just stuck on those and paying just attention to the dribbling and not being able to do anything else. I think it's important because, on the one hand, it has not been a part of normal evaluation, even for training of surgeons thus far. Typically, what people measure to see whether or not a display is a success, or to see whether or not a person who is learning to be a surgeon is being successful, is they look at performance measures. In other words, how accurately can they manipulate the instruments? Now, a person may look like they're manipulating the instruments very accurately. They may look like they've gained a lot of skill, but in fact, they may be using every ounce of concentration they have to do it. Whereas with more practice or with better technology, they may be able to do the same thing with less mental effort, but one has to be able to measure that in some way.
I'm Cindy Liu, and right now I'm working with Dr. Carswell, and she is working with a review project, and I'm helping her to design the experiment that for the participants to measure workload, mental workload. So our study is to have participants participate and see how well they perform in the training situation. With the open view, you look directly into the pegboards, the objects that you're going to manipulate. The objective there is to make sure that they feel comfortable with that. After about 15 minutes of training in the open view, they will come over to the laparoscopic trainer, and with that they will use a grasper and put through this hole on top of the vinyl and try to transfer beads without looking at the beads on what they are doing, and they will look at the screen while they are performing that task. Primary task that they are doing is to move the beads, and that's the major task. But the secondary task that the participant will be doing is to report seeing a red dot, a blob on the screen. And we ask them not to concentrate, not to focus on searching for that, and they have to work on the primary task, and as soon as that red dot pop up, then they will have to report it. And this will appear at different intervals, so they don't know when, but then they have to report it whenever they see it. I think the review project is wonderful, and it's wonderful for surgeons, it's wonderful for technology developers, visualization developers, and psychology, ergonomic development. But the main thing from the patient's perspective, I think this is a wonderful development because I want the doctor who operate on me or any other patients to have the best things available to them to help the patient.
And I'm not going to mess around with anything. I'm going straight to the corner, the inframedial corner, to get this uncooped.
Well, we have a number of phases to go through in the project. We need to develop the technology in the lab. There's software and hardware that we need to test. Then we'll be doing a study that lets doctors use the software in a training environment. And in that case, we'll be able to see how well the doctors do and what they like and don't like. And after we complete that study, then we'll be able to actually get to the operating room, where we hope we can really change the way physicians do surgery.
Well, seeing is believing, right? And the Center for Visualization is really aimed at giving us a new way of seeing, a new way of interpreting what we see, of thinking about what we see, and that's critically important. New ways of seeing have driven science in the past, and I think new ways of seeing will help us drive new science and new ways of thinking about our world.